All right, everyone. I am so hyped to be here. However, I must say, no one mentioned the cartoon Doug. So at that point, I was about to leave and log out. I'm not sure what's going on over there, but we'll work on that. And make sure we add that one into the number. But yes, as James said, I'm Justin Coles, and I am truly excited to be here with you all. And I am just thankful to the Boston Ujima Project, and really for all of you who came out, whether in person today or on Zoom, when we have all this rain happening. Hopefully that this talk can be an additional comfort to you all today, and we'll have some time to sort of talk and engage. Before I really jump into like the talk, I do kind of just want to give a little bit of overview of some of the language that I'll be using. And so I'm going to talk a lot about Black world making today. And so I just want to open with this sort of definition of thinking of Black world making, cueing a range of aesthetics that do not bend to worn logics or cultural taxonomies or categories long exercise against Blackness. World making instead suggests modal possibility for vibrant Black life. And so world making is a way of questioning the enforcements of dominant geographies. It also is about imagining new ways of being in the world. So as we go through today's conversation and dialogue at the end, just think about these. And so for the sake of time, we won't necessarily create these now, but I do want you all, as I am talking with you all today, to think about visioning a world, visioning a Black world. And so a central question that I want you to think about, particularly if you're taking notes, whether on your phone app or you have pen or paper or just mental notes, I want you to think of this question throughout this conversation. And that is, what is your vision of a Black world? And as I'm talking, as thoughts are coming to your mind, as questions are coming to your mind, I would challenge you to kind of think about some act of creation, right, that you could be doing simultaneously or after the talk when you revisit your notes. And so some examples you might do is write a short poem. You might do some kind of audio visual recording. You might write a few bars to some lyrics, a short story, draw something, create a digital collage, or even you might find some materials that you already possess in your room, in your house, some things that represent a Black world for you, or some things that you think will be necessary to take into a Black future. So really any modality that I invite you to think about today as we journey into thinking about Black aesthetics and fugitivity. And so I ground my exploration of Black aesthetics as an animator of Black life through one central question. How do we see Blackness before a grammar of death takes hold? That is, how do we create the capacity in our mind to see, know, and feel Blackness as love and untether ourselves from the distorted anecdotes and fallacies that tell us Blackness is all things death and decaying matter? A foundational part of this for me has been really moving from our external realities, namely anti-blackness, while still keeping the regime as core to my analysis, to the interiors of Blackness. That is, searching for the Black worlds within. I'm thinking about the Black then within Black aesthetics without ignoring the very real racial realities of anti-Blackness. So here, I specifically want to think with scholar David Stovall and his notion of fugitivity as not necessarily a running away from something, but rather a running to something. I want us to further think fugitivity today as searching for the Black worlds that we all possess within. So my time with you all today will be part sort of auto-ethnographic, part youth research and theory, as I am a Black youth worker, and really just part me, as I like to say, like dropping in random Black shit. That has just really been helping me to understand the death logics of anti-Blackness and how a frame really of Black aesthetics can work in opposition to such structures in fugitive ways. So my favorite Black queer poet, Deness Smith, who you see here, he has this poem called Dear White America. And the poem functions as a sort of Dear John letter, explaining why this Black person has left America and actually planet Earth altogether. So an expression to be fugitive to all of Earth makes sense when we consider W.E.B. Du Bois's remarks when discussing the imperial origins of World War I, where Du Bois stated, I am given to understand that whiteness is the ownership of the earth forever and ever. Amen. Dear White America then can be seen as a rejection of white earthly possession. Combining excerpts from Smith's poem, I am drawn to these portions that you see on the screen. So Smith says, I've left Earth in search of darker planets, a solar system revolving too near a black hole. I've left Earth to find a place where my king can be safe, where black people ain't but people, the same color as the good, wet earth. Until that means something, until then, I bid you well, I bid you war, I bid you our lives to gamble with no more. I have left Earth, and I am touching everything you beg your telescopes to show you in this New Testament, this new story you cannot see or touch or ruin, if if only this one is ours. So the title of my talk, Leveraging Black Aesthetics for Fugitive Worldmaking, is in conversation with my wrestling with Smith's poetic sort of Afrofuturist concept of having left Earth as an entry point, or rather foundational way, I have been thinking with Black aesthetics and fugitivity, particularly in a twofold way of one, rejecting white recognition and cultivating Black darker worlds. As a lover of Black arts and letters, I find myself always making sense of Blackness through such mediums. And Smith's poem and the themes of it are directly in the lineage of Black aesthetics, which trace back to the Black arts movement, which is considered the artistic and cultural sister movement of the Black power movement within the US, as well as just larger Black liberation movement struggles. Central to the Black arts movement was documenting Black life through a variety of artistic modalities. And Schomburg curator Sylviane Diaf says, was done as a way to present their experiences and thoughts as a means of forming community and expanding existing narratives around what it meant to be Black in the United States and the world. The relationship between the movements for Black arts and Black power, Diaf goes on to say, fostered a new aesthetics, declared that Black was beautiful, saw art as an integral part of the revolution, and promoted education as a vehicle for social and political transformation. Being part and parcel of the Black arts and power movements, Black aesthetics can be understood as a creative, social political tool to advance racial justice for Black people. Given this connection to the Black power movement, I deduce that Black aesthetics is and must continuously be birthed out of an intentional racial politics, a Black racial politics specifically, that seeks to center and uplift ways of being and knowing in the face of ongoing Black degradation. Black aesthetics then is a tool, or rather an embodied state of being and knowing and creativity that works to demonstrate a love of and for Blackness by turning inward, seeking value in Blackness rather than seeking value and affirmation from external factors that routinely demean Blackness as the antithesis to humanity. So I want to think about this question. How do we use Black aesthetics to understand the making of new and fugitive Black worlds? Thinking both through theory and epistemology, I conceptualize Black aesthetics in education specifically, as I'm a social justice educator, as a narrative, or rather sort of propositions that helps Black educators know, do, and become world-making pedagogues in their practice. And so Judith Madeira explains that the epistemes of Black world-making were building blocks shaped through inhabiting spaces of racial capital and living through the lens of racial difference. At the same time, world-making could be about rearranging the known world through interpretation. To theorize Black aesthetics is to theorize Black world-making. Foundational to Black aesthetics as a tool for Black world-making is truly untethering ourselves from the white gaze, seeing it as peripheral to Black life. As Tora Monahan explains through his reading of Paul Gilroy, in a backdrop of racial oppression and exclusion, the concept of a universal aesthetic has come into being through the presumed inferiority of Black creative expression and aesthetic capabilities. Black aesthetics is about the creation of Black self-conscious worlds, powered through a Black ethos or a cultural spirit that prevents Black people from being imprisoned by anti-Black structures and ideologies meted out by the US nation state. In Addison Gale's discussion of the Black aesthetics of the Harlem Renaissance, he shares insights into how artists and authors grounded their cultural productions in a rejection of whiteness or wanting to be white, instead turning inward to a spiritual and cultural focusing on Blackness, or my favorite, this turning inward to a Black soul, right? So I want us to think today about Black fugitivity really as this like deep soul work. Thinking with Black aesthetics as foundational to Black world making, and consequently, the sustaining of Black worlds refuses a total existence in what scholar Paul C. Taylor refers to as whitely world construction. Whitely captures the ways of interpreting, navigating, and inhabiting the world that are consistent with or that follow from white supremacist ideology. Thus, I want us to think about Black aesthetics as an attack on anti-Black society's systemic presupposition of legitimate Black invisibility and bondage through the refusal of succumbing to whitely worlds or whiteliness. And so while visions of leaving Earth in the vein of Deleuze's Dear White America may sound impossible, one day it will have to happen for Black people and essentially for all people. And so I'm obsessed with listening to podcasts, particularly news podcasts. I remember when I was younger, Angela Davis had this quote. It might have been in the Black Power mixtape where I first encountered it. But anyway, she just essentially said, if we didn't learn politics, politics would have learned us. And so I'm just deeply obsessed with sort of the politics of our nation and global politics as well. So anyway, I was recently listening to an NPR news podcast. And on this podcast, they noted that astronomers spotted a sun-like star puffing up and expanding to engulf a Jupiter-like planet. And so, according to one astronomer, what we refer to as our sun, our earthly sun, would eventually do that to our planet. Of course, perhaps some 5 billion years from now. However, I started to think, right? Like, although that seems far away, we have a lot of time before sort of the Earth essentially implodes. It seems that Black people really cannot wait 5 billion years for the world to be destroyed, right? And we have to think about what does it mean to destroy the world now? And so thinking with like disciplines like ethnic studies and other orientations where we have to be attentive to the histories of racial formation and how they unfold over time, given societal conditions, I want to use this space with you all as an offering of my thinking through the futurities of Black racial formations that may be imagined from elsewhere. And by elsewhere, I'm particularly thinking about creating and sustaining Black racial formations that are birthed through darker gazes of Black being and thought, gazes that birth darker planets, or dark Black-centric social spatial modes of existence. Blackness is indeed a racial, cultural, social positioning that is marginalized in US and global society. And so what would rejecting external, socially constructive views of Blackness by seeking internal guidance from the interiority of Blackness allow us to see and know? A Black elsewhere comes into being through being fugitive to current settler anti-Black social spatial logics that have constructed a whitely planet and that prompts the erecting of a Blackly or darker world. I locate the tools of erecting darker planets as residing in the cultural aesthetics of Blackness and Black people, which embody a Black gaze of being and knowing in the world, or a Black sort of onto epistemology. Going back to Dennis Smith's poem, I understand it as this sort of, I understand his articulation of having left Earth in his poem, Dear White America, as capturing the ways he abandons and really invites us to abandon violent gazes rooted in whiteness, or the white settler gaze, and logics of anti-Blackness to center Black logics or Black ethos, or the Black gaze that exists outside of and beyond whiteness. In other words, I interpret leaving Earth not only in the sort of imaginative Afrofuturist sense, but also in a more realistic sense of untethering ourselves psychically and materially from the death logics of anti-Blackness. Thus, I want to think about leaving Earth to create Black worlds as a reorientation and recommitment to centering Black aesthetics. I focus on Black aesthetics as key to Black world making due to its ability to push Black people away from the violent grips of whiteness and toward the rehumanizing grips of Blackness. As I theorize what to do in the meantime, in between time, right? So, as I mentioned, Black people don't have 5 billion years, right, before we really have to think about ways to destroy the world and ways that we think about being fugitive of such destruction. And so, when I think about the meantime, in between time, as scholar Kiana Ross would say, of my plan to build new, blacker, darker planets, I really choose to embrace this soil and honor the lineage of sort of my own ancestral peoples, And so what if I thought of Black aesthetics as being in community with land and the soil nurtured by Black people, and more specifically, the wilderness or a return to the wild? So as a Black man in the heritage of Gullah Geechee, tracing my descendants to the Frogmore Plantation in South Carolina, I cannot help but to think about the ways my ancestors, and some still engage in the rite of passage ritual of seeking. This is a ritual to enter the Black church community where one will be sent into the wild alone to communicate with natural objects, ancestors, and God. In a documentary, right, that's been circulating the internet more recently, a Black woman, Miss Irene Shipman, she talks about her own seeking journey. And she says, when I got to be 13, I went out in the wilderness and I prayed until I got converted and I was baptized and I got my right hand of fellowship in the prayer house. That means that you are a member of the congregation. A commenter in response to Miss Irene's words that have been circulating again, social media, said, you go in the wilderness because that's where your ancestors waded in the fucking water. It's where they died when trying to make it to their destinations. It's blood in that soil, it's spirits in that water, it's life. It's where you can hear and see clearly. And so, what if the darker planets we are in search of are actually right in front of us, or rather below us? What if Black world making isn't about leaving Earth, but finding the alternate universes that we already possess within, in those alternate universes and realities that we essentially are already living in? Since I think with anti-blackness a lot, right, in my research and in my thinking, and really as like sort of core to a lot of my analyses, I want to make it clear that I am narrating with you all today a story not necessarily of death, but rather a story of the structures that wish me dead. And how, with that, I'm speaking with Black aesthetics and fugitivity as a testimony to the witnessing of darker planets, or perhaps an offering, or even as an invitation for you all to go seeking in the wilderness of Blackness with me, where you might retrieve your figurative right hand of fellowship and be baptized anew as a way to understand the multitudes of love that undergird a Black aesthetic orientation in a way that propels you to look death in the face, to hold its hand even, and say, I will not die. Fugitivity, then, is a seeking or a seeing of oneself and each other before we are dead. It is about our centering of self, our centering of Blackness beyond the totalizing climate or weather of anti-Blackness, as Christina Sharp reminds us. I want to pivot now, thinking about Black aesthetics and education, and sort of the fugitivity that is bound up within that for a moment. And so growing up in a household where my mother, who you see on this screen, Deborah A. Coles, was a teacher in inner city Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where I'm from, I was immersed in sort of the aesthetic practices of a Black urban woman pedagogue. And of course, as a child, right, I did not have the terminology of Black aesthetics in my linguistic repertoire, but my mom was engaging what I have come to know as Black aesthetics, this sort of self-fashioning herself to inhabit and disrupt oppressive spaces as a Black woman, and to cultivate wholly new and separate Black affirming spaces for herself and others in a society structured through anti-Blackness, right? The endemic violence against Black self-fashioning. Thus, through her production and embodiment of Black aesthetics, she was simultaneously engaging in Black world-making practices, invested in Black liberation, and the rejection of white recognition as a marker for the value of Black life. Here, rejecting white recognition as a marker for the value of Black life can be sort of understood through Toni Morrison's discussion of her literary-based Black aesthetic engagements, where she committed to decentering the white gaze in her work to privilege Black ways of knowing and being. And so my mother's aesthetic practices centered on claiming Blackness as central to her everyday life, which in turn helped me to come to know and see the possibilities of Black being in an anti-Black world as an educator and researcher to and with Black youth. Through a combination of various states of presence, conceptualized by Chastity Bailey Fukuru, my mother's aesthetic presence, visible presence, and presence through strategic actions were grounded in her knowledge that schools, just like society, work structurally to marginalize and miseducate Black students and other historically marginalized students of color. As a result, my mother knew that there were limits to what schools could achieve on their own to counter systemic marginalization. Thus, a major part of my mother's pedagogical action was supplementing my learning experiences and that of her students well beyond the classroom walls. Central to the Black aesthetics that informed her teaching was really empowering children to aid them in resisting anti-Black racist practices. Resistance here should be understood as not only this sort of like fighting against racism, but also a turning inward to a cultivation of joy and celebration where students can learn to relish in their Blackness. I place resistance really sort of as a core foundational aspect to my theorizing of Black aesthetics, resisting and existing beyond the confines of anti-Black racism for a better tomorrow. And thinking about the way youth leverage Black aesthetics through their love of Blackness for a better tomorrow, as I mentioned, primary, sort of in core to my identity, is a youth worker. I'm reminded of this cipher performed by a group of Black high school students I taught writing to in the Midwestern US. And it was actually the very first research project that I ever conducted as a doctoral student in my first year. And so these students were among what scholars now call the Trayvon generation. And so in this moment, when I was working with these students, suddenly police brutality sort of became common in their daily lexicon, and they were making precise noticings of the ways anti-Blackness was showing up in their lives in a myriad of ways, more so than when I was a high school student, right? How I was thinking with anti-Blackness. And so these students and I engaged in teaching and research around their Black textual expressivities and how they were operating simultaneously as these sort of critiques of the nation state and anti-Black violence, while also exposing ways of being Black that depart from such violence or had nothing to do with violence and suffering at all, right? The assembling of Black interior worlds. And so in this clip I'm going to play, you will see a Black girl that I refer to as Shayla, providing an analysis of police brutality through rhyme as she was opening a cipher mashup, if you will. And so I'll play this clip and then I'll finish out and then we'll be able to open up into some dialogue about the way that I'm thinking about Black aesthetics with youth and fugitivity and how that can sort of propel us forward. And so hopefully everybody will be able to hear this both online and in person.
So America has a split personality. We're supposed to be free, but then we have police brutality. When a white man would kill 9 people and walk away without handcuffs, but they waited to say the Lamb was dead to take her mugshot like it's good enough. They act like it's the Black people's fault, like we don't got no knowledge, but Michael Brown got killed and he was gonna go to college. Dr. King was able to pray and be non-violent, but people get killed in church and we're supposed to stay silent. They took an oath to protect and serve, but do we not deserve to be protected? State her name, Black Lives Matter. They think all lives matter should be. All lives matter, man, you could have fooled me. Stand your ground really means Black people don't come around. Michael Dillon thought Gordon Davis' music was too loud, so he grabbed a gun and fired for 10 rounds. And Dillon thought that he was protected by the same law that let Zimmerman go free. And people dare say there's no racism in this country. No racism. We killed Trayvon again. When are we going to understand doesn't have to happen again? And while Dunn got life plus 90 years, the police can kill somebody as long as they can say that they fear. How can freedom be our mentality if our only reality is police brutality?
In her final rhyme, Shayla poses the question, how can freedom be our mentality when our only reality is police brutality? While the question wrestles with Black being and the possibility of Black people being free, it does not close off possibilities for a Black freedom reality or fugitivity. Clarence Terry Sr. explains freedom reality as the acknowledgement of and striving toward freedom and self-determination as the natural state of being Black or Blackness. An acknowledgement that he says stands in sharp contrast to the unnatural state of being African in America, a being ordered by and subjugated through racism. How is it that freedom is our mentality when our reality is shaped by things like police brutality? This becomes an invitation to move deeper into the Blackness and Black world making I seek to engage and invite you all to engage in via a Black aesthetics. In rethinking Blackness's relation to liberation through what scholar Kevin Kwashi frames as Black aliveness and what I frame in my scholarship as Black desire, Blackness and Black people are not simply sites of barrenness and suffering. Prior to Shayla's question that ended her contribution to the cipher, she communicated, they act like it's the Black people's fault, like we don't got no knowledge, but Michael Brown got killed and he was gonna go to college. Dr. King was able to pray and be nonviolent, but people get killed in church and we're supposed to stay silent. They take an oath to protect and serve, but do we not deserve to be protected? Shayla's questioning seems to be rhetorical. Of course, she believes Black people deserve protection, but perhaps the protection is not one that should or can be meted out by a nation state that thrives off anti-Black violence. There's an implied pivoting inward here that seeks to answer this question through a Black gaze. I do not want to think of Black liberation or Black fugitivity as an alternate plane of existence or a new destination, but rather as something, again, interior, birthed from the womb of Blackness. I really want to leverage Black interiority of Black cultural aesthetics as a pathway to Blackness being liberated. Black aliveness does not accept anti-Blackness and the ways it pushes Blackness to be death or be towards death. Black aliveness as a lens to help me think through Black aesthetics persists through what Amiri Baraka framed as Black creation. Black people freeing themselves from European restraint to imagine new modalities of existence. I contend that Black creation and the aesthetics of Black people, and Black youth especially, help us to not only imagine a Black world of aliveness, but to also uncover the way such a Black world already exists, always has, and always will. Kwashi explains that to move beyond a gaze that continuously equates Blackness with death, to move to a gaze of aliveness, we must start at a new entry point. The equation of Blackness and death is indisputable and enduring, surely, but if we want to try to conceptualize aliveness, we have to begin somewhere else. And I suggest that we start from within, returning to our histories and not hiding from them, but instead using them as a compass for us to pilot new futures. Writing from a Black world, Black life is a site or sites of sustained and or provisional world-making activities that are invested in liberation, right? According to Catherine McKittrick. And that produce a specific line of sight, the essence of which is spiritual. While Black people are understood as burdened by the peculiar sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others and are enjoined by white supremacist culture to limit themselves to this way of seeing, this second sight that resides within Blackness also produces these sort of hidden transcripts that allow Black people to defy white supremacy and live our lives in esteem. I liken these hidden transcripts, birthed through second sight, to Black expressivities, the building blocks for Black aesthetics, and the assembling of Black worlds. Second sight, then, we must see is a gift, a way of seeing more rather than simply of seeing poorly. And being looked at by a white gaze is, as Kwashi notes, a horror for Black people. Might a Black line of sight birthed through Black aesthetics and fugitivity make being looked at for us an exercise in liberation? And so I wanna stop there and I wanna end there, really thinking about those musings around Blackness and fugitivity. And as we transition to sort of open it up for a dialogue, I'm just gonna put up this sort of framework, which is the framework that I have been developing for my work, thinking with Black aesthetics in education, and really sort of tangible and practical ways. As a social justice education scholar, core foundational to the work that we do is sort of how do we move from theory to action? And so how do we think about Black aesthetics as a living sort of embodied framework that just isn't about theory, right? Isn't just about beauty and art, but actually allows us to have a framework, a modality to work with folks, to work with ourselves and community to really push this work forward. And so thank you all for that.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And we'll open it up for questions. If anybody has a question, you can raise your hand or speak out loud. Oh yeah, you come in.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much for everything that you've said. I found it really inspiring and interesting. I had a question about, you talked about growing up with your mom, how she really did a good job about centering Black aesthetics. And I was wondering like specific ways that she did that. Because I grew up, I'm mixed race and I have a white mom, and I think that that like really had an impact on how I viewed my Blackness. And I think that like I would love to hear some examples of how you feel like she did a good job of centering like Blackness and Black aesthetics when education systems like wouldn't supplement like understanding of Blackness.
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's interesting. One, I've been thinking with my mom a lot lately because mainly one of the reasons why I'm here is because of that influence as an educator. I think there's a few layers I can answer that. I think first one, just like context wise, I grew up in a very sort of Black space. Um, Being from Philadelphia and then moving to a sort of a Black suburb. This was during the time that scholars refer to as the minority boom. And so it was actually sort of a reverse white flight, like early, like, we go through periods of white flight. So basically, white folks were leaving the suburbs to go to the inner city, and Black people were leaving the inner city to go to the suburbs. So I was in this very interesting cultural Black space. So I think that just one, right? We sort of were in a way forced to think about what does it mean to be Black in very real tangible ways. Also, my mother, she's a Black woman in the US. And so I always think about Sojourner Truth's, right? Ain't I a woman? And so I think before she even had me, before my mom even knew I had kids, I think she was sort of navigating the world along those intersections of being both Black and woman, both being fetishized and invisibilized. And so I think that gave her sort of a heightened sense to sort of be intentional about pouring into us. And then sort of another larger view I'll give is that I consider myself as a dark-skinned Black person, and everyone in my family is as well. And so I think existing as a Black person, but then also with the layer of colorism, I think she was very intentional about that as well, knowing that, yes, there is this sort of navigation of Blackness and empowerment of Blackness, but also even within that, right? How does a dark skinned person sort of be empowered as well? So to think about more specifics, everything in our home was very. I think I like to say like my household almost had this like pro-Black curriculum, and so we had this extensive library, and I remember visiting the library of other friends, maybe who were Black or non-Black, and you really wouldn't see books about children who look like me, who look like us. And so there was no shortage of being able to go in. I'm thinking about books like Mufara's Daughters or Tar Beach, or like James Weldon Johnson's Lift Every Voice and Sing, right? Like, so I was just surrounded by this curriculum that sort of let me know no matter what I encountered in the external world, right, in the school curriculum, that this sort of home base was true, right? And this is who I was, and this is what I needed to honor. And so I think that sort of cyclical um, environment, right? I think of just the actual products of how I was being learned. That way, when I got to school and I didn't see myself, I didn't necessarily go through this cognitive dissonance that I think a lot of people do of sort of um, wrestling with who I was. And so I think that's just a clear example. And there are lots of others. I think I grew up in a Black church, right? I think that was sort of very intentional. And essentially every activity that I did that I was outside of school um, was sort of like Black centric, if you will.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I see Sierra has a hand raised.
Yes,
You want to say something? Yeah.
I do. First of all, Justin, thank you so much. I really appreciated the way that you called in so many elders and ancestors, but also contemporaries. And also just like really sitting with the wealth of information that you shared with us. And I had two questions, two curiosities, if it's okay.
Yes, please.
The first is about you, like what is your Black aesthetic, like what's your aesthetic practice of fugitivity, and
Mm,
like what are the modes, especially being in the academy, that you use to like both care for yourself but also to like make work for yourself, that's like untethered from capitalism or like needing to do things for work, or just like what do you do for yourself?
mm.
um, and then the second question is, you might have touched on this, but I walked away to get some stuff. So, can you talk more about how you place Black arts and letters? So you mentioned in the beginning, the Black arts movement, but maybe if you have any other, like, how do you place Black arts and letters, like Black aesthetics in movement building? So
Mhm.
we talked about world building,
Yeah.
and things of that nature, but I was just wondering if you could, like, at Ujima, we are very deeply, yeah, I'm just wondering if you could like package that up, I guess, and like tell
Yeah.
us at Ujima, we're really invested in arts and culture. And so I'm just wondering, like, how should we be thinking about it? And like, what would your recommendations be for any of us that are on the call today about, how we place this inside of movement building?
Yeah, thank you for both those questions. And I'll try to answer them concisely, particularly the first one. I think, and this is what I hopefully I was kind of getting at in the talk. I think Black folks, Black people, Black communities, Black nations, like Black aesthetics are sort of inherently built in, right? Like, if we think about Black aesthetics literally as like this, how do we self-fashion ourselves in a world that literally wishes that we weren't here, right? Or literally tries to deny our histories. Or, and let me get that wrong. They wish we were here, right? But just not living the way we want to live. So we naturally do that by being on this call, right? By you all inviting me here, us, like again, like I mentioned, being able to talk about Black shit, that's a Black aesthetic, right? My specific Black aesthetic, I think, particularly in the academy, has really just trying to be, in just a practical sense, I think to live and show up boldly, to do this work, um, despite the ways, as many of you know, even in matters of diversity and multiculturalism, Blackness gets othered, right? People see like Black specific work as counter to like multicultural progress, which is this very interesting thing. And I think that we're seeing that now, particularly with like the firing of folks. I think there is a DEI attack, but if you really look deep and do the nuances, a lot of DEI officers that are being specifically attacked are Black. And so there's a way in which we don't think that Black people can be producers of knowledge or can be sort of leaders in sort of coalition building because people see Blackness as this thing that really doesn't fit in this neat box of diversity. And so that has been me, right? I have just been continuously pushing um, and carving out space for this work, and not necessarily in a way to like, beg people to see sort of why Blackness matters and why it's important, but to just do it, right? And to get them to sort of fold around that. And I think particularly I think if we talk about global societies, that's a different. But I think when we think about the U.S. context specifically, which is where my research really focuses on, people often say like, "Oh, we kind of have to get out of this like sort of black-white binary, right? Because of the multiple bodies that now exist on these soils." But what will often happen is folks will try to simultaneously discount and overlook Black contributions while using those same contributions to advance, right? Sort of their own uh, movements, right? And so there's this really weird thing where we become invisibilized. So I think I just want to say that is how I navigate it, is to just to say no, right? And honestly, to call people out when they're doing it. I think there's a lot of work about anti-racism. I think people will acknowledge that they need that work. I don't think a lot of people think about their anti-blackness, right? And that's Black people included. And so that's been my goal. And I think just on a more personal note, I think boundaries here. I think I'm at UMass Amherst. That's a huge bulwark of a white institution. And in my entire college of education, there are maybe two Black men, maybe 3 or 4 Black women. Um, and there's a lot of violence that happens, right? And it's not even necessarily intentional, but it's just a white space. Like it's super assaultive. And so I think literally putting up my boundaries and disengaging when I need to do that. And then the last part I would say y'all are already doing this probably at Ujima, but I think when we think about movement building, if we really do the deep study of our histories of Black arts and letters, they have always been foundational to movement building. And I would just say any work that you're doing, always make sure there is room for artistic expression, right? Like that is just a non-negotiable. I think it is something that we owe to our ancestors. And I'm thinking about on plantations when they would sing Juba, right? It was this thing where it sounded very like foreign and like nonsensical to like overseers, but right, it was this way that Black folks were communicating via what felt like this disconnected sound and mashup of words, right? But they knew what was happening. And that is how they were sort of seeking to plan and plot and get free, even the covertness of sort of sneaking out, right, to read, right, and this trickery, right, of getting sort of plantation kids to like teach them, right, things like that. And so I think just Blackness is creative. And I think the moment we lose that, the moment our movements die. And so also I want to quickly say, outside of this, there's I think about multimodality a lot, and sort of Elliot Eisner has this concept of like forms of representation, and essentially like um, the human capacity is so much more than like words. And we limit ourselves to possibility if we don't engage in artistic expression because we are only using like a small percentage of our mind when we just speak and do dialogue. And so what we're forgetting is that our hands, right, our bodies, our movement is what is the pathway to freedom. And so I would just make sure that anything y'all are doing, please make sure that people are active and creating. And the importance in that is not just individual stuff, right? Like people have to be collective. This is why I was so excited about this space. Like, yes, I can think about Black aesthetics. You all can be doing work, but what does it mean if we join forces, right? And we're collectively building. That is the core to movements. I would say artistics and collectivity.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions?
There's a post.
Oh, they are?
Yeah, Gio,
Oh, you have a question? Yeah. Gio has a question.
Okay, yeah. Just want to say hi. Thank you again for the workshop. I'm on staff with Ujima. But I feel very passionate about Black placemaking.
Mm.
And so that's where I'm speaking. That's the point I'm speaking from. How important is it to divest from patriarchy when we talk about, and I'm saying this also as a cishet man, how important is it to divest from patriarchy when pursuing Black placemaking and the grander, journey that you explained a lot with Black fugitivity or just simply fugitivity. Yeah, I feel like that's a hang up that I personally experienced a lot. That's the one thing that some folks might not want to let go of. They get a little combative with the speech, that kind of thing. So was wondering if you could tap into that with us.
Yeah, that is that's a conversation I would just love to have even more. I'm Black and queer, still a man, and I think I even am working with that, right? Always thinking about that. But I think we have to. I think it is so important. And I just want to speak from my own experience in my work. I have found, because of how patriarchy works, that when I'm thinking about collectivity, futurity, the most like sort of beautiful and expansive and dynamic relationships that I have toward progress are typically when I'm in spaces with Black women, right? And I think a lot of that is because how patriarchy is so connected to everything, right? Racial capitalism, competition, individualism, and like I find myself when I'm in spaces, particularly where men or male identifying folks are the majority, it's like this anti-progress because it becomes individualistic, it becomes competitive, it becomes about, who's who, right? Who's leading, right? And I think we see that with our own movements, and particularly in contemporary times. And I think just the simple answer is like that shit has to be immediate, right? Like divesting from patriarchy has to be like at the top of our list, like to do this work. And even myself, like I think when I'm like, how do I step back, right? How am I in community more with women and femme identifying folks? And I think we just have seen that time and time again how yes, we can think about Black liberation and all of that, but at the end of the day, because we have been um our realities as Black folks, right, as African folks, have been warped, right, by this sense that patriarchy is this thing. In many cultures, right, many cultures of color just have not existed under patriarchal modes of existence. And so we now find it so appealing. And I think it is part of our undoing. So yes, I agree with you. I think we have to divest, and that should be a top priority.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And we have one last question. Joyous, I saw you have your hand raised.
Yes, thank you so much for this, Justin. My question is a bit of an ask. I'm putting together a cultural advocacy framework that's rooted in the Black aesthetic, and I really love the definition that you gave at the very top of your talk tonight. And I was wondering if you could share it, because I tried to write it down as quickly as I can, but sometimes I can't even read my own handwriting back. So I was just wondering if you wouldn't mind dropping it in the chat.
Oh yes, for sure. And what was which slide? Was it the first?
1 second.
I just want to make sure I'm giving you the right.
It was embodied state of being and becoming. And then I lost you after that.
Okay. I will try to get that before we log off.
Thank
Just a note on that. We do have a note stock, Joyce, that we just dropped into the chat. But Justin, if you want to send us the link to your slideshow, we can also make sure that that makes it in and gets out towards people as well.
Bless y'all. Yes, thank you.
Great. And I just put that in the chat, and I can share particularly for that work that you just mentioned. I'll share a couple of articles too that are accessible and kind of expand on these ideas.
Thank you for being so generous. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you, everybody. James, yeah, you take it.
Sure. Thank you all. Thank you, Justin, for all of the wisdom today. Super grateful. And thank you all for joining us today for Ujima Wednesdays. But again, thank you all for being here today.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Justin.
Oh, we got people in here. I'm sorry. We got to stop the recording too before I show everyone face.